My name is Ray Budavari. I am, as you can see, a senior staff technical product manager and platform architect in our networking and security business unit at VMware. It's great to have the opportunity to present at Network Field Day for the second time. I think it was NFT 15 when I last had the chance. And so today, on behalf of our NSBU team, I'll be covering NSX Intelligence, which is a new capability we've built on top of the NSX platform and recently released. Now, before I jump into my content, just to kind of help me calibrate, I wanted to get just a quick show of hands from everyone on, who has an understanding of the NSX components and architecture already. Sosa? Okay, good. Any of you spent any hands-on time with NSX yet? Okay, that's something we'll definitely have to fix. And did any of you happen to catch the keynote demonstration at VMworld on NSX Intelligence? Just the one. Okay, good. That helps. All right, well, look, so I've been at VMware for many years now, more than I'd probably care to admit. Even before the beginning of our network virtualization journey that started in 2012, and I've worked across all areas of the NSX product, and I have to say, this is one of the most exciting solutions I've been part of. In fact, I was excited enough about Network Field Day that today's like my first day back in the office after being out for a couple of weeks. So I just mentioned that in case I look a little pale or I need to take a seat. It's not definitely not a lack of enthusiasm on my part. I'm very excited to share this with everyone today. All right, I'm going to start on the worst slide, and I promise that it will get better from here. Just anytime we're talking about strategy, this is a slide I need to include. That being said, I'm going to primarily be talking about features that are already available and shipping. I know you've seen these disclaimers many times, so I promise I won't read it out line by line. All right, so our agenda for today. I'm going to start with just a little bit of context on why, NSX and analytics are such a great fit. Then I'll introduce NSX Intelligence, give you a demonstration of the solution in action, and finally, an overview of how we plan on extending and integrating NSX with other products at VMware. And also some of the priorities, where we're taking this solution going forward. I'll certainly do my best to get through all the content, but I know I don't need to encourage sort of the Network Field Day team to keep things interactive. And I'd obviously much rather answer your questions and get into those details than get through every single slide. So yeah, jump in at any time with questions, comments, observations. All right. As I said, just to help explain why we've introduced NSX Intelligence and what it's about, I wanted to talk about some of the common or recurring challenges we've seen our customers face when it comes to networking and security. Right? The first is visibility. So this is across all the different, endpoints in their environments, virtual, physical, bare metal, and cloud. Right? It's hard to get an end-to-end view, often because these different endpoints might even be controlled by different teams or parts of the organization. Another challenge we've seen is around awareness and communication between infrastructure and application teams. In some cases, application teams see security, as a barrier. Or even if there is actually good collaboration inside an organization, the tool sets can be fairly rudimentary or static, right? All too often people are falling back to spreadsheets and Visios and CMDBs to exchange information about applications, right? It's not dynamic like the applications themselves, which may be changing, scaling up or down or adding new services, right? So this leads to a lack of application awareness in the security policy, right? All too often they're infrastructure-based security policy that doesn't keep up with the applications. And we've seen this that, even with the ability to apply east-west security something that was almost impossible to do before NSX, getting to that granular workload or application-aware security policy, even with the distributed firewall, is difficult, without that visibility and application awareness. So, too many people weren't getting the maximum benefit out of microsegmentation. The other challenge is too many different tools to operate, monitor, and report on networking and security, right? So this means too many different consoles across different teams, and obviously leads to too many manual workflows or handoffs between these teams, because there's no single place to look at and analyze data. So our view is obviously that the NSX platform can uniquely help solve many of these problems.
Do you find that the dynamic policy is harder from a technical or a people aspect?
It's generally an organization or a people problem. Like often application teams, they see security as getting in their way more than helping because of the lack of tooling. And so that tends to be the biggest challenge. But at the same time, I think before we applied, when we had static policies, that was also part of the problem too. So it's primarily people, but it was also a tooling problem as well. Cool. Okay, so on the NSX team, we feel that network and security analytics and the use of data science technologies like AI and ML, so artificial intelligence and machine learning, are a great fit with NSX because it builds upon what we already do well, right? We're multi-platform, so you've seen NSX provide networking and security for virtual machines. We just demonstrated the same for cloud-native applications, right? We support bare metal and public cloud. The other key point is context, right? NSX has a very rich and unique context about workloads because of our distributed data plane, right? We implement our services as close as possible to the workload, right? At the hypervisor or directly at the workload. And so it puts us in line for basically every flow across the network, or before traffic even hits the network. It allows us to see, all the layer 2 to layer 7 flow information, user process and application information from inside the workloads using what we call guest introspection, right? So it puts us in a very strategic place where we see all the traffic flow. We've proven that NSX can scale, right? We have customers using it for security policy enforcement for over 50,000 workloads. So we know the underlying platform is highly scalable and can all be centrally managed. We also have a proven history of partnering with the ecosystem, right? So, this allows us to leverage context from our partners, but also other VMware solutions and products like vRealize Network Insight, and in the future, Carbon Black. So it's more than just NSX, but the rest of the VMware portfolio as well. So our strategy here is, with NSX Intelligence, is to use analytics, right, to build value on top of the NSX platform and solve a lot of those challenges that we just talked about. I said I wouldn't spend too long on the background, so now I get to move on to the interesting stuff, the cool stuff, which is NSX Intelligence, right? And I mentioned that analytics was really a natural fit with NSX, but one of the other things is we saw drawbacks with some of the traditional approaches to network and security analytics. And that's because they relied on a highly centralized architecture and agents, or could only collect data from the network. So this created a challenge in terms of, size and footprint to begin with, right? Needing to manage agents across hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of endpoints creates a significant operational overhead. And if we talk about a centralized processing model, right, where we have to pull data from the endpoints to centralized appliances, this can require a very large footprint, right? Racks of servers and storage just to store and analyze the data. It also creates additional network overhead due to additional duplication of traffic, and also a trade-off in terms of limited context, right? You may only see ports and protocol information, not all that rich context I mentioned that NSX has, or you have to get into sampling of data. So this is where, by contrast, in NSX Intelligence, right, we've delivered a distributed analytics engine. It leverages that rich workload and network context available only in NSX to deliver on security policy management and compliance across the data center. So, as I said, we've already proven that we can provide services like routing, stateful firewalling, and security enforcement at scale using this distributed model. Now we're just building analytics capabilities on top of the NSX platform using that same distributed architecture. And this allows us to achieve our analytics using a much more lightweight model, right? A lot of our processing is offloaded to the compute resources and the source, and we only stream the minimal amount of data to our appliance for analytics, right? And the other key point is because NSX, as I mentioned, is already inline, right? Our architecture allows for multiple functions to be applied directly at the virtual interface, right? We can apply analytics immediately after a firewall in a single pass, inline at line rate in the hypervisor without any additional overhead. So this is all done in kernel space. So our view is that we're bringing something unique and differentiated to analytics, right? So, some of the other key benefits that I mentioned is that we sit directly on top of the NSX platform. So by not needing to rely on agents, integrations, or external APIs, right, it's a very short path to go from an analytics or some analysis or recommendation we make in NSX Intelligence directly into the data path. And you'll see that when we demonstrate the solution. So I mentioned NSX is already inline for every flow. So by storing and analyzing this data, it really allows us to do more, right? And it builds upon that principle of NSX, is that when you can, distributing a service, is the most efficient way to implement it. We're also leveraging our knowledge and awareness of what effective security policy should look like by building that into a number of AI and ML algorithms that drive our analytics and recommendations. So, we understand what typical security policies should look like, how how applications are grouped, what's common traffic profiles for east-west traffic in the data center, and apply that with NSX Intelligence.
Can you go into that piece just a little bit more, that specific piece? Because I'm curious to know then, what does that mean as far as the collection of data, creating baselines, and what normal looks like, what that means in the context of a single environment? What's going on? What do you do?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things we do. So I mentioned, actually, I think I might cover that in the next slide in a bit more detail, but
Okay,
but essentially, yeah, actually, I'll tell you, let me hold that thought, see if I cover it. I think I do have precisely that content, and then we'll come back to it and make sure that I cover any additional questions that you have, if you don't mind. Okay, the last thing I wanted to add here was around the fact that because of our distributed architecture, we don't have any trade-off in terms of sampling or being too far away from the workloads as well. Okay, so here I wanted to get a little bit more into the solution detail. So with NSX Intelligence, what we've done is built a scale-out data platform that will allow us to ingest all that context from your environment, from NSX managed endpoints, into NSX Intelligence using a lightweight streaming architecture. So from the hypervisor, we'll stream, all of the flow, application ID information. We can look into the workload using, I mentioned as guest introspection. This is our secure channel into the workloads via VM tools that gives us user, process, file information, and more, right? We store this data on our appliance. But actually, one of the interesting things we do is we heavily optimize this data platform, right? So essentially, by pushing analytics to the source, right, we're able to do things like match only on unique flows, applying, compression, deduplication, and other tuning. So at the scale of an NSX domain, right, we can really minimize the amount of data that we need to send to the smallest footprint only, and it allows us to deliver this entirely in a virtual appliance form factor, right? So our data platform stores up to 30 days of historical data in a very small footprint, right? Now, once we've stored that data, on top of the data platform, we have our NSX Intelligence engine, right? So this allows us to build functionality to do things like the end-to-end visualization of traffic flow, right? So this is where we'll see and allow you full visibility into your security policy. Then we have a planning or recommendation engine, right? And this is where we provide recommended security policy utilizing the analysis. And these are the features that we currently have. And then when we talk about next steps, you'll see how we're going to continue to build upon this with additional security analytics like anomaly detection and compliance and reporting as well. Importantly, we've also built this platform to be highly extensible. So, we can serve or share analyzed data with existing security tools and share feeds with other VMware solutions or our partner ecosystem. This is all built as an extension to the NSX platform. All right, so the last thing that I want to cover before I get into the feature set is, as part of our strategy with NSX Intelligence, is that we want to extend beyond our traditional networking, security, and virtualization admin audience, the infrastructure teams, the network and security teams. So firstly, we want to provide them full visibility across the environment and better tooling, allowing them to be more proactive, less reactive. But we also want to extend visibility to application owners, right? We all know they're becoming increasingly important when it comes to controlling, the spend in, and deployment of applications. And so, we're building out our solution to support providing visibility to the rest of the business as well. All right, so now that we've kind of covered the high-level solution, I want to focus on our current capabilities. And this is where we'll get into what we can do with our algorithms and learning today.
Ray, real quick before you jump into that, through that whole architecture diagram, I noticed that you were pulling from software sources and hosts and things like that, and you mentioned Carbon Black as a future integration point. But there was also another analytics tool that was purchased recently, Nuance, which is more focused on devices. Is there a plan to integrate Nuance's intelligence into this platform, or is it going to come in through some other form?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. It's, I think, so recent that I couldn't give you concrete plans. I know, there's definitely a fit there with our SD-WAN products, and so that's a discussion we have started, is how can that become an additional feed of context for us? So how can we extend intelligence beyond just the data center, but also to branch devices and IoT? So it's very likely that that's the path we'll take, but it's really early on. So yeah.
Right, but you're not pulling information from Velo and the SD-WAN products in right now?
Not at this point in time,
okay.
No. Now, that being said, and I do actually have an architecture slide, which I'll explain, how we do receive data. That's very extensible. We already run it today on hypervisors and on the NSX, the manager appliance, so we can easily extend it to other sources. So, yeah. Okay, so in terms of the current capabilities of NSX Intelligence, we've kind of built out a base set of features that we're continuing to build on, right? The first thing was building out that purpose-built data platform to store a complete record of all flows without sampling, and it provides that foundation for our analytics, right? You'll see in the demonstration visualization across the NSX domain, including correlation of all that flow data, workload data, and inventory for visibility, and then security policy recommendations for firewall rules, groups, and services based on observed traffic flows. And this is where, just to talk about the algorithms a little, I mentioned machine learning, right? And in machine learning, there are different modes or algorithms like supervised learning and unsupervised learning. So this is where, dependent on whether the data has been classified yet, right, we can do unsupervised learning and start to provide recommendations. So basically looking at, for example, a group of workloads and determining whether they might make up an application, or looking at certain traffic flows, and again, seeing if they look like they're normal or not, like web to app and app to database versus web to database. So these are the algorithms that we've already programmed ahead of time. And then once we've created a policy, we can move to supervised learning, which is where we already have a baseline and then can start to detect deviations from it. All right, now I'm going to show you a couple of screens of the user interface, but I really want the demonstration to do most of the talking. So I'm just going to mention a few details here, but we'll cover this in the demo. So I've mentioned a few times that NSX Intelligence provides a rich visualization of all the NSX inventory and flow at scale, right? I think another important point is that we've seamlessly integrated NSX Intelligence into the NSX UI. We also, actually, it's very dark on this screen, but it's in these days, you have to have a light and a dark theme in your product or you're not cool, so we've done the same, right? So this is the dark theme. I'll show you the demo in a light theme. Hopefully it shows up a little better in this view. But this is an example of visualizing, all of the flows across a high-scale environment, right? You can obviously click on and get more detail about individual groups, and it gives you visibility through communication maps. So this is an example of an environment with thousands of VMs, hundreds of groups that get visualized in one place, right? So this is your overall communication map, which, to be honest, can actually be a little overwhelming, right? We categorize or display flows in 3 different ways. So unprotected means it's just hitting a default rule, like an allow any rule, almost like it's learning and observing traffic. Blocked means it's being dropped or rejected by our firewall, and allowed means it's being permitted. But the other thing is our UI is hierarchical. So it's very easy to click on a group or drill into the next level of detail to get to the information that matters, right? So here's an example where we filtered by a specific group, and now you can see a much cleaner view of flows in between objects at all levels, right? So we can see information at a flow level, at a group level, or at a VM level. You can also see flows, in this case, to groups and objects that are inside the NSX inventory, or flows to external IPs, ones that are outside the NSX domain, public IPs as well. And then, as I said, you can always highlight these to get more information and dive deeper. And you'll see this in the demonstration. We can get right to the workload level and get context from within the virtual machines. So that's visibility very, very quickly. Next capability I want to describe is the recommendation engine. So this is how we provide those analyzed NSX firewall policy recommendations for security rules, groups, and services. So this basically automates creating new distributed firewall policy and objects. And we can do this because we collect historical data over different periods of time, right? 1, 12, 24 hours, 1 week, 1 month. You know, we can run these recommendations at several layers, so you could do it within the virtual machine view. You could select any VMs in your environment. Again, we're going to see this in the demonstration, so this is mostly for context. Now, before the demonstration, I want to talk just a little bit about our architecture as well. So, you know, I mentioned our lightweight footprint, right? I made some bold claims about how we're differentiating and what our values are in this space. So basically, the NSX Intelligence data platform receives streams from 2 sources, right? From the NSX manager, which is where it gets configuration data, right? Security groups, firewall rules, membership of groups, and also data, you know, gets streamed from hosts. So this is where we send all the flow and related data, like application IDs, rule IDs, statistics, and user information. Right? We store all of this information. We apply those optimizations at the source and stream it at 5-minute intervals. This is what allows us to create that very lightweight footprint. And because the data gets sourced directly for NSX components, there's no dependency on copying traffic, IP fix, logging, or any other methods that would create more overhead. In addition, you know, this streaming architecture will support additional sources of context. Now, the next point I wanted to make is that NSX Intelligence is built on several best-of-breed scale-out technologies. And I'm highlighting a few of them here. You know, primarily just to mention that we're focusing on adding our value in the analytics layer because, you know, and we're using these components as building blocks. So we have Spark, which is our distributed analytics engine that allows us to implement all that NSX-specific logic, the AI and ML that I talked about. So Kafka provides a stream processing platform. So this is the underlying engine that streams information or the large-scale data feeds from the NSX manager and hypervisors. They act as clients and stream data into NSX Intelligence. And it also provides a highly scalable pub/sub message queue. And once that data is streamed into NSX Intelligence, right, we store it in Druid, right, which is a distributed time series data store designed to ingest huge quantities of data and then provide low latency access to it. We also leverage Elasticsearch for a lot of the high performance full text search engines that drive the filtering in NSX Intelligence. HDFS, or the Hadoop distributed file system, is used to store data persistently. And Corfu is an NSX component that provides distributed, fault-tolerant log and transactional services. And so we take all these kind of big data components and on top of this develop the NSX analytics and features such as our security policy recommendations. So it's by using a lot of these best-of-breed technologies that we have these opportunities for extensibility. Another key point I wanted to make is that, you know, that all of these technologies are transparently managed by NSX, right? You don't need to operate any of them at all, right? They're just mentioned so you can understand the architectural components and that we're focusing our value down here in the analytics capabilities. So here's a slightly deeper view of that architecture in action. And I don't have a lot of time to spend here, but at least to describe how these components work together. So I mentioned that our NSX Intelligence appliance receives stream data, from NSX transport nodes and also from the NSX manager via Kafka before storing it, right?
I have a question.
Then
Where here does the inspection of every packet from every workload, is that part of the streaming?
yeah, this actually happens directly here at the hypervisor. So that's already using essentially our distributed firewall engine. What we also do is we run, though, a streaming client on the hypervisor, which is responsible for sending at 5-minute intervals that data over to NSX Intelligence. So it happens at the source.
Is there, from what I've seen from other companies, they like to sample data. Is there a reason, why is it that you guys choose to inspect every single packet?
We're already in line for every single packet.
And
so
that has no increased performance?
No, so this is I think, going back to our unique value. We've already proven, we've had since 2012 distributed firewall running at line rate with less than 3% CPU utilization. So we're already in line there doing the firewall policy. So there's no overhead for us to do the analytics at the source because we're already inspecting everything anyway. And we're really utilizing the most plentiful resources in the data center, right? All the x86 compute capacity that's running your virtual machines. We're just using an additional couple of % of CPU off those resources that are there already. And you only have to provide per host the services for the workloads running on it. So this is really the value of bringing that distributed platform to analytics as well. Yeah, from our view, you're absolutely right? Sampling means you get limited context. It means your solution, it's too heavy. It's a trade-off that you don't want to make, but you have to just because of footprint or being too far away from the data. We're just doing more with the data that we're already in line for. Okay, I was mentioning that we receive data, it's streamed to us. We store it, and then these are the components here of NSX Intelligence that are responsible for analyzing and processing this information. So we have in our analytics engine a number of pipelines which run. So for example, the processing pipeline collects data from Kafka and enables the correlation pipeline to match or merge flows that come from the hypervisor with configuration data that comes from the manager. Then we have a recommendation pipeline, and so this runs on demand when you create a security policy recommendation. While the monitoring pipeline runs periodically to identify recommendations that need to be, or deviations based on our supervised or unsupervised machine learning algorithms. And then we've built various services on top of these analytics to present data for display up in the UI. And the last point I wanted to make on this slide is that we've built this as with the intent of it becoming a scale-out architecture, where all the core components are distributed, and these services can actually be scaled independently based on which features you're using, right? So we've really designed this as an architecture that will scale both as we add new functionality, but also as our customers' environments scale as well. All right, actually I lied. I had 1 or 2 more slides before. Yeah, it will only take me 1 minute. Before I move on to the demonstration, and that's NSX Intelligence is delivered in a virtual form factor, right? You don't need racks of servers to get started. It's basically a separate download that you just stage and store, but deploy directly from within your NSX manager, right? So it's really just an extension of NSX manager. So it's here under the appliances tab. You add an appliance, you follow the standard OVF deployment workflow, choose a size, small or large, based on your environment, point it at the compute manager. And then at that point, all lifecycle management of the NSX Intelligence appliance is performed directly within your NSX manager. So this includes version upgrades, resource monitoring, enabling data collection, right? So it's essentially, it's very easy to manage and it's just, there's no additional operational overhead to running NSX Intelligence.